We're going to start with a definition of motivation because I want to make sure that you and I are on the same page when we're using the word. Now, from a scientific standpoint, motivation is the general desire or willingness to act in a certain way. Another way that you may hear people define motivation in the context of kind of science and research is motivation is often used to describe this force that explains why you would initiate something or why you would continue with something or why you would quit something. That's an interesting thing, that you have a motivation to quit something. Of course you do. That's the force that makes you take the action to quit. It's motivating you. And since you listen to the Mel Robbins podcast, you know I like to simplify things. So I have just this very plain spoken definition that I use that takes into account all the science and research. And here's my definition of motivation. And this is what I want you and I to use as we're having this conversation. Motivation just means you feel like doing something. That's it. Motivation means you feel like doing something. And that means a lack of motivation means you don't feel like doing something. Simple, right? And that's what's interesting about motivation. When you feel like doing something, it's easy to do, right? Because you're motivated. You feel like doing it. And if you Googled motivation, or you've listened to podcasts on the topics, or you've read about the science of it, I know that you have bumped into the word dopamine. So let me talk about dopamine in the context of self-motivation, okay? Dopamine is a type of neurotransmitter and hormone. And dopamine is involved in so many different aspects of your body functioning. But when you talk about dopamine in the context of motivation, what researchers, neuroscientists, psychologists, everybody is talking about is the fact that dopamine plays a role in what's called the reward system in your mind. That's why dopamine is often referred to as the molecule of motivation. And when you are listening to anybody or reading about topics like behavior change, habits, in our case, the science of motivation, it's really important to understand the role that dopamine plays, because I think there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding about what dopamine is and the role that it plays. And a lot of people feel like, oh, dopamine is what makes me motivated. If you could just put dopamine in a pill, I'd feel more motivated. Somehow that dopamine is sort of like that motivation on tap. That's not technically the case, because dopamine is tied to cravings and to things that you want. Dopamine is present to try to drive you toward things that you crave or toward things that you really want to do. And I'm going to give you a couple examples, because once you wrap your brain around this, oh my gosh, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I totally get this. So let's just take a scenario. You've been at work all day. You had an early lunch. You've been in meetings all day. As you're driving home, you're hungry, right? Now, when you get home because you're hungry, you're going to be very motivated to open the fridge, to look inside, and to figure out what to eat or cook yourself for dinner, right? Why? Because you're craving food. You're hungry. But have you ever noticed that you can be really motivated when you get home to make something to eat and to eat real quick, but the second you're done eating, it is so hard to motivate yourself to clean up the kitchen and to do the dishes. Why? Dopamine. See, you came home hungry. You were craving food, which is why you were motivated to cook. You felt like doing it. Dopamine is present because it's tied to craving and to the thing that you wanted. And in fact, this is kind of cool research. Let's say that you really love steak. And if you're coming home and you're craving steak, do you know how motivated you are to turn on the grill so you can grill that filet? In fact, your mouth is just watering thinking about it. Talk about the molecule of motivation. My mouth is watering just talking to you about it. That's how much I like steak. And the research shows that foods that you like spike dopamine levels by 50%. Why? Well, because you both crave it and you want it. That's why you're motivated to cook it. And this is true with all things that you crave or things that you really, really like. And these are not necessarily good things that I'm going to list, but do you want to know the top things that spike dopamine levels? It's not pretty. Meth, cocaine, nicotine, sex, social media, video games, sugar. See, people get motivated to find these things because they crave them. You want to know what's not on that list? College applications, updating your resume, putting up a dating profile, stepping on a scale, doing dishes. I mean, who on earth craves sticking your hands in a soapy sink with a bunch of greasy pans? Not me. That's why you never feel motivated to do it. And look, there are so many people out there that are experts at biohacking dopamine. That's not what we're talking about today. You and I are talking about the reality in a normal person's life, which is, do not expect this molecule of motivation to rescue you in a situation where you feel down, you feel discouraged, you don't feel like doing what you need to do. It's not coming. And yet you still need to pick yourself up and force yourself to do the work. And just like motivation, dopamine is wonderful when you have it. But this conversation is about the other situations, the 99% of your life when you don't feel like doing what you need to do. I don't feel like applying to college after I got rejected. I don't feel like going to the gym. I don't feel like working on my business plan. I don't feel like eating healthy when I'd rather have a pizza. I don't feel like putting myself out there because I'm shy and introverted and I got screwed over by the last person I did. I don't feel like cleaning out the garage. I don't feel like having a mocktail when I'd rather have a beer tonight. I don't feel like having that conversation with my mother. I've been avoiding it for 3 months, so why not avoid it another one? And notice, when you don't feel like doing those things, you don't do them. Do you? That's why you'll often hear me say, motivation is garbage. It's garbage because it's not there when you really need it. If motivation were on demand, if it were on tap, if we could just, pop a pill, I would pour that sucker into a cup, man. I would drink it every day. And you want to know what else? If motivation were easy, everybody would have $1 million in the bank. Everybody would have six-pack abs. Everybody would be having the side hustle of their dreams and taking vacations because they would be motivated all the time to do all the things that get you those things. But that's not how life works, is it? Because knowing what you need to do, it's not enough. It's just not enough. And here's the issue. And I know it. Because the clock is ticking. Waiting for motivation to strike is basically saying it's never going to happen. And if you're in a situation like we are in this household, you got 11 days. You got 11 days. You cannot afford to let your feelings derail the actions that you need to take right now. And one more point about this. I personally am highly motivated to see our son push through the feelings of rejection and put in the work so that he is proud of himself, so that he knows that he put his best foot forward, that he didn't let this one school stop him. But I can't do the work for him. I can't just spray him with motivation. In fact, the more pressure I put on him, the more demoralized he's going to feel. He knows what the game's about. He knows what the stakes are. He knows what he's up against. But here's what I'm offering. Even though you can't do the work for somebody else, and even though you technically can't motivate someone else, you can't feel it more than they want to feel like doing it, there are things you can do to help someone tap back into the drive inside themselves in a moment like this. And these 2 steps are also what you need to do in moments where you're the one who needs the motivation. Step number 1, you must remind yourself of why this matters to you. Let's say that again. Step number 1, you must remind yourself of why this matters to you. This is one of the most important hacks for self-motivation, and that is understanding exactly what you want and exactly why you want it. Because number 1, if you don't really want it, you're not going to feel motivated to do the work to get it. And if you don't know why you want it, you're not going to feel motivated to do the work to get it. How do you self-motivate? How do you pick yourself back up? How do you motivate yourself again when you feel like life just punched you in the face?